Hello, welcome to our showcase reading of some of the work produced in our 5-week workshop series, Writing Your Place, facilitated for the Alley Theatre in Strabane in conjunction with the Bealtaine Festival and featuring writers from Strabane, Donegal, Derry and Dublin. We've had a great time exploring the issues of life writing and memoir, and we hope you enjoy these pieces. Our first reader is Christine Mcgillum reading Window to the World.
Window to the World. When the factory opened at the top of our street, the doors of the world were pushed right open to me. I was 10 years old in 1965, a freckled-faced, red-haired, shy and mostly nervous young girl who had lived a fairly sheltered life, who knew little of anything outside of our home and school. A TV had come into our home maybe the year before. It was in black and white, crackling and fuzzy, a second-hand purchase by my father for a boxing match between Cassius Clay and Henry Cooper. I didn't know what to expect from a TV, but the excitement between my brothers and my father filled me with anticipation. What a disappointment it was, watching a fight through the box that had to be cajoled into life by slaps and bangs, or a brother holding the aerial up above his head until his arm ached. Far more interesting and exciting to me was the drama-filled panoramic view of life through watching the factory girls go to work every morning and return home in the evening. The noise levels were louder in the evening than morning, when all of the pent-up emotions and pressure of assembly line workers was released in laughter, screams, shouting and singing as relief escaped into the evening air. I was obsessed. Summertime was great. During the school holidays, I was legitimately able to sit on the wall that divided our garden from the footpath and take the show in. Real-time theatre 5 days a week. During the school term or in poor weather, I had to peek out the letterbox. Skewed views and limited focus on any one person was so frustrating to me. I'd have preferred to stare out the window, but my mother forbade that, as she said it was common looking. I'd be up and ready for the first clatter of feet on St. Mary's Drive, the street where I was born, sitting on that wall, feet in white plimsolls, swinging in expectancy by 8:15 a.m. Plop right down beside the beautiful, heavenly scented lilac tree that had been lovingly planted by my mother years earlier. It gave me shade and a prop to hide and duck, nevertheless an intimate behind-the-scenes seat. I got to know them all, the early birds, never late for work, would get clocked in first. The teenage girls and the younger women, not in such a hurry, who linked arms and were often spread 6 or 7 in a chain across the street. Few walked on the footpath. Nearly everyone walked on the road, as there were no cars that I remember ever driven to work, not on our street anyway. There would be smaller groups of 2s or 3s linked together, and then there was the loners. I felt sorry for them. They were missing out on all the fun, the gossip and the news, who was going out with who, what was on in the cinema, and what happens on Crossroads the night before, plans for meeting up after work and dances to look forward to at the weekend. I had never been in a cinema nor watched Crossroads, although the girls in school were talking about it. Our TV only went on for boring sports like horse racing and football and the news. The latter was always scary. My father was constantly paranoid about communists. On the street from my ringside seat, though, I learned of Dr. Zhivago. If you hadn't seen it, then you were missing out, as I remember. It would be years later before I would discover that Omar Sharif looked like, and began to understand the exotic appeal to young girls in a small town in Northern Ireland in the mid-60s. There was plenty of young men working in Adria, the hosiery factory that made women's stockings and tights, which were becoming fashionable at the time, but they lacked the luster and swag of the young females that caught my attention. Mainly, I remember their wolf whistling, which the girls welcomed by calling back to them or feigned embarrassment with a smile. Mostly all the factory girls wore the nylon blue overalls to work, buttoned up over mini skirts that flashed all shapes of legs, mostly stockinged from the factory shop. Thick thighs, skinny thighs, dappled skin or purple blue knees shining through the hosiery, if it was one of the many wet and windy days. I judged them on how they walked. The linked arm crowd were always in high heels or kitten heels, and I could almost identify who was walking up the street before I saw them by the click-clacking of their shoes. Fast walkers, slow walkers, short steps, long steps, and those that managed to add an extra click that was long and put an extra beat into the orchestra of feet. Few wore flats. They, to me, were always disappointing, like they were letting the side down or something. Then there was the swagger, the swinging of hips, some natural, others exaggerated through overalls that were a size too small, or no swagger at all, just women intent on getting to work on time and trying to not get soaked in the rain. Hair and hairdos were also intriguing to me. Extra marks were given for a high or very high beehive. I was all ears about backcombing and hairspray. A far cry from the two plaits going down my back. Trends in fashion was introduced to the vocabulary in my head a year or two later when the hairstyles changed to short, cropped, twiggy styles. Lots of mascara and black eyeliner and Mary Quant tunic dresses appeared under overalls. These girls had cottage industries going on in their bedrooms when a dress could be whipped up overnight from a pattern out of a woman's own magazine. There's a Willie Nelson song with a lyric, "We got our education in the cities of the nation, while I got mine from the factory girls." They filled my head with life and color and possibilities that preoccupied me throughout the day and took me away from reality. And for that, I was very grateful.
Thank you so much, Christine. It's so lovely to hear that again. Lovely. Our next reader is Florence Forbes, who's reading The Swing.
This piece came out of an exercise in which we had to think of a place that was important to us, and it's called The Swing. Wouldn't it be lovely, a favourite phrase of mine, to own a tree like that? So it came to pass, beech and hollies in a line, with berries red and fat. A branch, a rope, a woolen rug produced a swing below the apple tree. Flying to and flying fro, it made my heart sing to see what I could see. Older now, a hammock is more appropriate to dream of times before, lying on some cushions and feeling quite sedate until I hear a snore.
Lovely, Florence. Thank you so much. And our next reader is Rose Mcdead, who's reading A Moment in Time.
This piece came out of an exercise in which we had to think of a place and time that was important to us. And this is an extract from A Moment in Time. Then came a day. It was August the 16th in 1977. I had a day off and I headed out shopping. I always enjoyed shopping and was by now well used to the expression, "Y'all come back now," which was what the teller at the till always said after I had paid. I was in a drugstore, which was no more than a supermarket, which sold groceries and over-the-counter medicines, such as Panadol and antiseptic creams. I could hear the girl's voice on the overhead tannoy announcing various deals and bargains that were available in the store. I took my time because even buying a pint of milk seemed to involve a decision. There were so many to choose from. Milk fortified with vitamin D, low-fat milk, coconut milk. I had to choose. Vegetables were another new world to be explored. Red peppers, green peppers, aubergine, sweet potato, sweet corn, and black-eyed peas. Finally, I had everything I needed and arrived at the checkout. There was no queue. I was standing at the till ready to pay. Then from across the tannoy, the girl's voice could be heard shouting, "Elvis is dead. The king is dead. Elvis Presley is dead." The whole store erupted. The girl at the till jumped down from her seat, leaving the till deserted. For a split second, I was thinking I could walk out the door and not pay a dime, and no one would notice. But instead, I turned my eyes to the rest of the store. The normally orderly scene of shoppers doing their shopping and staff replenishing items on shelves had changed. The scene was now a mass of bodies all jumping up and down and wailing, "Elvis is dead! Elvis is dead! The king is dead!" Shoppers were dropping their carefully chosen items to join in this mass explosion of mourning and wailing. Black people were hugging white people were hugging black people. They hugged me too. I hugged them back. A couple of African Americans huddled together and began singing "Peace in the Valley" in their deep, strong voices, as only black singers can do. Everyone was crying, and the black mascara mixed with teardrops became streaks of black on many white cheeks. Their normally neat and attractive beehive hairdos became dishevelled and all shook up, reminding me of the Elvis hit. The words Memphis and Greyhound could be heard above the wailing. "We have to go to Memphis. We have to go to Memphis. We have to get a Greyhound to Memphis." This mayhem only lasted about 5 minutes when finally the voice over the tannoy said, "Elvis may be dead, but we must get back to work." People seemed to get a grip on themselves, and order was restored to the store. I had paid for my groceries and made my way home. A feeling of contentment had come over me, and back in my apartment I reflected a little. I began to realize this for me was a moment in time. I loved Elvis too, and I loved his music and knew him from childhood. Just like the people in the store, I was sorry about his death too. Elvis had linked us. Suddenly, I was no longer on the outside looking in. I was one of them. I had finally arrived. I was part of the great experience that was being a nurse in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Fantastic, Rose. Thank you so much. Wonderful again to hear that piece. Lovely. And our next reader is Nina Quigley reading a poem, Marcus. Thank you, Nina.
This poem was inspired by an exercise that involved us looking at an historical figure. Marcus. Were they brown, like mine, your eyes? What shape your hands? Were you smaller than I am now, or were you considered a giant among men? You lived your life of action, a soldier and a king, with all the weight of empire on your head. Your legions cut a swathe of war across the known world, and you took your last breath fighting the wild Germani in the north. For me, and many like me, you've been a beacon of enlightenment in the dark. You possessed a wisdom strangely modern for this age, and today, the clarity of your thought falls gently, like a rain of calm forbearance, to hearten the lost in 12-step fellowship rooms.
Thanks so much, Nina. Beautiful. Thank you. Our next reader is Breen Mcginley reading Lapis Lazula. Thank you, Breen.
Hi, I'm Breen Mcginley, and this is my piece, Lapis Lazuli, and it was inspired by a prompt to look at somebody from your past. Lapis Lazuli. Peggy rang, distressed. Somebody had broken into her flat. As I climbed the 4 flights of stairs to the attic rooms, I wondered yet again how she managed. Peggy sat in front of one of the low windows that failed to illuminate the room, a small, frail figure. Unusually for her, her face was shadowed with anxiety. Someone broke in, she said. Things are missing. The flat was dotted with the artifacts of her life, ornaments, books, paintings. There was no sign of disturbance. The door was open when I came back. I think it was him. She gestured downward to the flat below, whose occupant was known to have a drug problem. The lapis lazuli is gone, she said, and other things, small things. She shook her head, bewildered. How did he know what to take? I was introduced to Peggy soon after we moved to Moville. She was almost 90, living alone. I was almost 30, with a husband and 4 small children. It was an unlikely fit, but we were both blow-ins with no connection in the area, and we shared an interest in books and art. At first, I did little more than exchange Peggy's books in the local library, something she was more than able to do herself, as every week she took the Lochswilly bus to Derry and went to the library there. I was one of a retinue of helpers that Peggy gathered, women who helped with her shopping, her cleaning, men who drove her wherever she needed and did odd jobs. Even in her cramped accommodation, Peggy exuded an air of grandeur. When the GP lectured her about drinking, she told him her father had said the exact same thing, that there should be no drink taken before 11 a.m. In her childhood home, everyone, even the footmen, got a drink at lunchtime. Brandy was used to mitigate shock, but only one, a second was pointless. Born in 1900, Peggy was English from a wealthy aristocratic family. She was 17 when her father remarried, and his new wife didn't want Peggy and her sister. She kept the details of her life hazy, how she managed in those years after she left the family home. However, she was fully disowned later when she married an airman, Guy. They had a daughter before Guy was killed in the war. When her daughter later abandoned her 2 small sons, Peggy was left to care for them. She came to Ireland when the boys were teenagers, sometime in the 1970s. Peggy disliked if I had a child or children with me when I visited. Her room was studded with the relics of her life, and they radiated like magnets. Peggy claimed to be connected to both British and Irish royalty. She bore the marks of privilege, good health, strong teeth. She always sat erect, and her diction was precise and clear. She had strict rules about meals, and with some exceptions, didn't drink until after 4 p.m. She still had her childhood books inscribed to her by her father, fairy stories and tales of heroes. But mostly, she just liked to talk, to be the center of my attention, or whoever else happened to be in her company. We discussed books, and she particularly liked the stories of Catherine Mansfield and William Trevor. We browsed photographs, and she chose landscapes and seascapes to copy, in delicate but often gloomy watercolors. She painted flowers onto postcards and then used them for her correspondence. I still have some, and each time I see one, I'm reminded of that irascible, independent woman. After the break-in, Peggy moved to another apartment. Later, she seemed upset when I became pregnant again, and calls from her became less frequent. In her late 90s, unable to manage alone, she bowed to advice and took a room in a nursing home. I got occasional calls saying that Nazis ran the place and appealing for a bottle of whiskey. Long ago, in that attic room, Peggy had passed me the piece of lustrous blue stone. Lapis lazuli, she said, intoned like a mantra. Papa gave it to me. Her eyes glowed, the words like a caress, a reminder of a world far from drafty seaside rooms, a world of light and ease. Recently, a white cat has adopted my family, graces us with his presence, allows us to feed him, even stroke him at times. Fully self-centered, he has the easy grace of an Egyptian god. Though his eyes are green, I see them blue as lapis lazuli.
Beautiful, Breach. Thank you so much. Again, lovely to hear that again. Our next reader is Therese Morgan, reading Uncle Canis. Thank you, Therese.
This is a childhood memory. One of my uncles was a Catholic priest. He was tall and thin. His own name was Paddy, but his priestly name was Father Canis. We called him Uncle Canis. He lived in England in Yorkshire. Every September he returned to Ireland for a holiday. As he was the older brother of my mother, he stayed with us for a week, then went to his other sisters for the remainder of the month. His arrival was in back to school week, which was not a good time for visitors. I needed to ask my mother for money for books and other items. I also wanted to share the news from school, the small things that are important to any 9-year-old. I deeply resented this intrusion. The best tablecloth, best china laid out for breakfast, the best of rashers and sausages bought in, and the fruit. We rarely had fruit. Uncle Canis slept on a spare bed in the dining room, which we rarely used. One day he had several apples in a row along the windowsill. My brother sneaked in and took a bite out of each one. Of course, this caused a big row. My mother was angry and embarrassed. As the eldest of 5, I was more aware than my siblings. When I questioned my mother about the extra food, she said Canis needs to be nourished as he is in a poor parish. I was unaware that a priest depends on the money he gets from his parishioners. The summer I was 18 years old, Uncle Canis died at his home in England, where he was buried. My mother was ill and unable to travel to his funeral. Her grief and anger hung over us all. I never saw or heard her crying, nor did she speak about her loss. Several years later, she did manage to travel to pay her respects at his grave. Looking back now as an adult, I wonder if Uncle Canis was happy as a priest. To me, it is a lonely and celibate life. Perhaps he was happy to return to his empty house after spending time with all his nieces and nephews in Ireland, 22 children in all.
Lovely, Therese. Thanks so much. Thank you. And we go from an uncle to an aunt. And our next reader is Jim Simpson reading Aunt Lizzie. Thank you, Jim.
Maybe it's only years later that we truly realise people's worth. Maureen encouraged us to get in touch with our memories about somebody significant, Aunt Lizzie. In the end, her body gave up and she was buried like everyone else. There would be nothing on her gravestone to mark her out as different, no obelisk or blue plaque. My Aunt Lizzie lived her whole life in 22 Lismain Street in East Belfast, off Ravenhill Avenue, near the bakery, Breathe in the East, in a narrow, dark, mid-terrace house with a freezing outdoor water closet and a clanging clock in the hall. She called it Cody House as it was very small. Lizzie was number 3 in a family of 9. The oldest child died in infancy and my dad's second mother. She was a kindly, pale, indoors woman with greying hair and flour on her hands, who slow walked to prayer meetings in the evangelical hall with her hat on. She had the ear of God. What else can I say about a Bible-believing Christian in a nylon house coat with simple tastes and no material chance in life? When she started at the crowded national school, probably in 1909, she must have been one of 60 poor infants crammed into a single classroom to begin their careers. The boys in short homemade pants, the girls in smocks. It was a tough, tumble, booted world for a gentle wee lassie. I couldn't speak, she told us, not a word. I wet myself, had to go home, don't you know, because the master was harsh. I wanted to skin him. Her eyes had remained dark and deep, like a cow's, she said, smiling, sad when at rest. Her head was to the side for the monochrome photographs we took on car runs to Ballycastle, as if apologising. Imagine, her heart went out to insects and dumb animals. How could anyone be bad to a dog or a horse? She'd worked in a mill and fairly brightened us when she was out in her gig. Read to us from your diaries, Auntie Lizzie, my sister Olive would ask, and our younger cousin Rosemary. In her soft voice, Wednesday, 14th of October 1964. Rained all day. Annie's asthma was bad. Got her a new inhaler from Dr. Galbraith. We're to have a new general election tomorrow. James will fit the draft excluder on Saturday DV if he gets his bike fixed. Rose Lecky called. That sort of thing. I keep the diaries in my writing room and a Sharp's toffee tin, a dozen little gems. Wee Annie was her older sister, an innocent soul. I hate writing that, you know. It feels so patronizing, so disloyal. Ah, now. Anyway, Lizzie kept her right, but they were both getting smaller. At some stage, they had become the toadies, Toady House, Lizzie and Annie, Annie and Lizzie. My earliest memories are that they were already carers, unmarried girls who'd got left behind, unpaid, no off-duty time, looking after my grandparents without complaining. Lizzie had nearly got a man in her 40s, but he jilted her, said he wasn't good enough for her. He was right about that, the dirty Scot, my father said, who didn't swear. I picked up his indignation. She had picked her curtains and everything, and she took it hard. The man was called McCune. Back in the 50s, Belfast was awash with brown lemonade. This may have been a drink unique to Northern Ireland, like Iron Brew in Glasgow. Cantrell and Cochrane certainly kept us fizzing. It came in gunmetal crates, bouncing on a fast rattling lorry, in money-back, stone stopper, big bottles with little red rings of rubber. The aunts kept it on tap for us. Would you drink a mineral? Would we? What? Sunday teas were open-hearted and plenteous. Lizzie baked her mince steak pie on a thin tin plate, stooping low to the ancient oven. The scullery had an uneven tiled floor and smelled of gas. Her pies were the best in the world, no question. You ate your slice slowly with peas, with a light dusting of salt on top like a skift of snow. They steamed and were intensely meaty, and boys, a dear, her pastry was short. 10 of us would squash warmly together around the same table as they'd crouched below during the Blitz. Lord, save us from Hitler and his bombs. Father, will you say grace? Our grandfather obliged with a shaky old blessing. We think of the hands that prepared this food. That was Lizzie and Annie, their hands. How those women cooked the tall and yawn sweating galley the Lord himself knew. After the savoury course, it was a sugar storm of rhubarb tart and apple creams. Trifles appeared, mandarin sections floating magically in jelly like dainty goldfish in fancy dessert dishes. There were angel cakes and currant squares on a 3-tier stand, lemon meringue if you were able. And all the time, Lizzie and Annie padding softly in flat pom-pom slippers, refilling cups. Put another kettle on, Annie. They'll want more scald. They were keepers of the flame, allowing my sister and me and Rosemary, like the ones before us, to taste and see what the old days had been. Before TV and Doctor Who, when they sang around the harmonium. They both had great voices. Annie sang in her sleep. What was it last night, Annie? Abide with me. Oh, Annie. Annie and Lizzie beaming, taking their end at themselves. Did they know that they guarded a holy place, a gathering space in the forest, a hallowed clearing in the woods with its clear spring water where we could all be together and drink deep?
Oh, thank you so much, Jim. Just beautiful. Beautiful. And our final reader is Rachel Stanley, reading The Yoga Teacher. Thank you, Rachel.
Hello. This piece came out of an exercise where we had to remember somebody important in our lives. The yoga teacher. It was in the greengrocers close to where I live that I first spotted the advertisement for Bruno. He was from Switzerland and had been studying yoga in India and medical yoga in Korea. The ad referred to the profound and mystical experiences he had when living in the forest for 6 months in the USA in 1982. He spent time as a Buddhist monk in Sri Lanka and Burma, where he sat for 9 months for 20 hours daily. In Tibet, he lived among nomads. I saw the contact details and phoned the number. The classes were conducted in the Jesuit college across the road from where I live in Bealtaine in Dublin. On that first evening, as on all the evenings I attended his classes, he was dressed completely in white t-shirt and loose white pants. He had a Swiss-German accent. He wore glasses which he removed when practicing. Though he could contort himself into any posture humanly possible, such as wrapping one leg around his neck, he started our beginners class with the manageable basics. I had been to other teachers over the years, but I knew that after attending his classes, I could never attend any other teacher after him. Here was someone who, because of his own profound experiences, had entered states of consciousness that gave him an edge in his teaching. We commence with standing poses, raising our arms slowly above our heads as we inhale, and then as we exhale, we lower the arms. After a while, I'm conscious that my breath has slowed and is now in sync with the upward and downward postures, with front and back bends. He knows our busy Western minds, the habitual patterns of distraction, of always being drawn by the 5 senses outside the self. It is in these classes that I gain an understanding of those words uttered in the New Testament about the peace that passes all understanding. Look around the room. Now listen to the sounds you can hear. Perhaps you can hear sounds outside the window. Now bring your attention inside and try and keep it there for the next hour or so. Almost like a mantra, he repeats over and over again, be at all times aware of what the mind is doing and where the mind is going, and gently bring it back to this moment. And so the postures flow, asanas and breath in unison, and the mind in detached observance of both. Frequently, he walks among us, observing our practices, and where necessary, corrects the angle. As I practice the triangle pose, referred to as Trikonasana in Sanskrit, he touches me on my side, and suddenly it's as if a switch has been turned on, and the accuracy and knowledge come not from the brain, but from that part of my body. It is in this way that I find myself making an incredible breakthrough. It is the discovery of the universal living intelligence that lives within each cell of my body. Only one who has himself experienced this level of seeing can communicate this knowledge. Yet again, on another occasion, when asking us to angle the sacrum towards the back of the room, the knowledge comes from that part of my body. And yet, never having learned biology and therefore anatomy in school, I had no prior knowledge of where my sacrum was located. I was possibly not even familiar with the word, and yet here I was with instant instinctual knowledge of where in my body it was located and being guided by this interior awareness. And the sacrum is in the lower part of your back. We conclude our classes with deep relaxation. He uses the metaphor of the sea. With the breath, we are riding the waves, feeling like a drop in the ocean, one with it and part of it. I borrowed these lines myself for a poem I later wrote about the sea. I felt sad when I discovered he was going back to Switzerland. He now spreads a considerable amount of time teaching people to be yoga teachers. When he went back to Switzerland, I had such a profound sense of gratitude and felt deeply touched by my encounter with him. It was an encounter of soul with soul. It was around this time that the poem started to flow. Sitting in half lotus, the bell chimes, calling me back to remembrance. Thank you.
What a perfect note to end on, the notion of calling us back to remembrance, which is what we've been involved in all these weeks. Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you, for those readings. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with you over this time. And I want to thank Jackie Doherty and Jean Smith of the Alley and Strabane District Council for facilitating this. And I hope you've enjoyed listening to us.